I used to wonder what parents meant when they said they just knew something was wrong. That gut feeling, that moment your heart goes quiet. Now I understand it too well, because on the day my son disappeared, the air felt wrong. And 2 years later, when I was alone at night, obsessively scanning satellite images of the coastline, I zoomed in and I saw something I was never supposed to. If you're hearing this, it means I survived long enough to tell it. We lived in St. Brevin, a coastal town in Northern California. Not quite touristy, but the beach was our thing. Every family had their spot, a favoured strip of sand, a go-to trail, a secret snack shack. Ours was Shellman Cove. It wasn't much, just a quiet curve of beach, backed by a wall of dunes and brush. That Saturday, August the 10th, 2019, was hot. We arrived around 10:30 AM like we always did. Me, my wife Eleanor, and our son Owen, who was 11. He wore his red swim shirt, those faded grey trunks, and his favourite bucket hat with a torn brim. Digging into the sand before we even unloaded the cooler. Owen loved the beach, and that's the part that haunts me the most. He wasn't a daredevil, he didn't surf, didn't wander off, he just explored. Dug holes, collected shells. At 11:50 AM, I remember Eleanor asking if we should eat early. Owen was already off near the base of the dunes with a plastic spade, talking to another kid. We called out to him. He waved. 10 minutes later, when the sandwiches were unwrapped, I turned back to call him again. He wasn't there. We started with the obvious. Checked the tide lines, the dunes, the water's edge. Nothing. I walked to the family 50 feet down and asked if they'd seen a boy with a red top and a bucket hat. The dad said, "Yeah, he was digging near that little creek. He was alone, I think." That little creek curved into the dunes, feeding a brackish marsh just beyond the trees. By 12:15 PM, we were yelling his name, and by 12:30, other beachgoers were helping. By 12:42, Eleanor was on the phone with the police. They called in a drone team and a K9 unit by 2, and by 4 PM, they cordoned off a half-mile of shoreline. Owen wasn't in the water, no footprints beyond a certain point, but his bucket hat, the one with the torn brim, was found near the start of the trail that led into the woods behind the dunes. It was dry, untouched, just laying there, like someone had placed it. They told us it was probably abduction, no ransom note, no sightings. The cameras on the boardwalk faced the shops, not the beach. It was a blind spot. The boy Owen had been speaking to, nobody knew who he was. No matching description at nearby schools. A sketch circulated, tan, dark hair, about 12, but no one came forward. We stayed in that town for another 6 months, didn't celebrate Christmas, didn't open the mail. Eleanor stopped going outside, I stopped sleeping. I kept checking the beach trail cameras every few days. I refreshed Google Earth constantly, hoping for updates to the satellite layer, some blurry overhead miracle. Nothing ever changed. Well, not until March the 3rd, 2022. I don't even remember what made me open Google Maps that night. Just a habit, I guess. I typed in Shellman Grove. I clicked Street View. Even the beach trail didn't have a proper one. But something new had appeared. A Google car route along Maple Bush Road, just above the dunes. It had a new photo set, uploaded 6 months earlier. I clicked, and there it was. A shot of a rundown edge of the marshland, just where the trail exits the woods and hits the road. Someone was standing at the edge. Blurry, red shirt. Next to him, a man in a wide brim hat, looking away from the camera. The boy was hunched, turned towards the woods, frozen mid-step, like he didn't want to be seen. I stared at the image for 20 minutes, zoomed in, zoomed out, back and forth. It was Owen. Same build, same posture, same red shirt. I screamed for Eleanor. She came in, saw the screen, and covered her mouth. We submitted the image to the police the next morning, but you know how it goes. "Oh, could be anyone. Low resolution. Hard to prove it's him." They didn't follow up, didn't request the data from Google, so I did something stupid, something reckless, and maybe the only right thing I've ever done since that day. I went back to Shelman Cove, alone. It's been almost 3 years since that day, but the air still smells the same. Salt, rotten kelp, the faint tang of sunscreen from someone else's memory. I parked at the same lot, I walked the same path, my boots crunching against gravel, then giving way to soft, whispering sand. The only difference this time, I wasn't holding anyone's hand. It was a weekday, the beach was quiet, too cold to swim, too warm to feel haunted. I made my way past the flattened dune we always called Owen's Hill, the one he used to roll down laughing, arms flailing. I stood for a long time in silence, and then I walked towards the trail where they found his bucket hat. It looked exactly like the Google image, except now the brush had thickened, and the trail was overgrown, like it hadn't been used in a long time. 20 yards in, the air changed, not just the temperature, in sound. The wind died, the waves dulled. I could only hear my own breath tied to my chest. And then I saw it, a narrow offshoot of the trail, almost hidden behind thorny brush. It wasn't part of an official path, no boot prints, just old sneaker treads. Small, faint, something pushed me to follow it. The further I walked, the more it felt wrong, like I stepped out of the world and into a painting that didn't want to be looked at too closely. Then I saw it. At the end of the path, tucked beneath a fallen tree, was a wooden shack, rotting, sagging, overgrown with ivy and sand-dusted vines. It looked abandoned, but not old. There was tarp on the roof, some bleached but not torn, and someone had hung a wind chime made from bottle caps and spoons. It was moving, gently. I should have turned around, I know that now, but I walked closer, because in the corner of the shack's window, partially buried under wind-blown dirt, I saw something red. I dropped to my knees and brushed it off. It was fabric, a shred of a shirt, same material, same colour as the one Owen had been wearing, and printed faintly on the inside hem was his name, O. Dawson. I called the police from the dunes. This time, they came. They brought 2 officers and a canine unit. The shack was empty when they entered, but recently used. Inside were 2 sleeping bags, a pile of canned food, and a locked box filled with children's clothing. Some of it still had tags. They dusted for prints, took the clothing, said they'd follow up. But I seen the look on their faces. They didn't believe. They thought I'd planted it. I could feel it. So I did the only thing I knew how to do. I went back to Google Maps. I spent the next week pulling every street view between St. Brevin and the next 3 towns inland. Any location near woods, bridges, isolated buildings. Every time I saw a blurry child or red shirt in a photo, I'll take a screenshot. I had 39 images by the end of the week, then 42, then 57, but none felt right until I found the one outside an abandoned fish cannery 40 miles north. It had been uploaded just 4 months ago. There, in the alley beside a row of rusted barrels, was a boy in a red hoodie, standing perfectly still, and beside him, a man, face turned away, but his hand was resting on the boy's shoulder. I called the police again, same story. Hard to confirm, could be a coincidence, but this time, I didn't wait. I drove to the cannery the next morning. It was worse in person. Rusted beams, broken windows, empty pallets shattered like bones. I walked around back, And there, near the barrels, was a bottle cap wind chime, same style, same random spoons, and beside the dumpster, behind a pile of mouldy tarps, was a notebook, water damaged but legible. Inside were sketches, children's faces, names, nicknames, some had birthdays, and one page had a grid labelled Move Schedule. Beside it, a crudely drawn map of the coast and a line connecting Shellman Cove to the cannery. There, at the end of the line, was a name circled in red, O. Dawson. I handed the notebook to the local sheriff's department the same day. They glanced at the drawings, then passed it to the junior deputy, said they'd log it for reference, but I could tell they didn't see what I saw. They didn't know what it felt like to look into a child's sketched eyes and feel your own son staring back at you. So I went home and I kept digging. That night, around 1:30 AM, I scanned the alley from the Google Maps image again. This time, I noticed something I'd missed, a sign. Just above the dumpster was a faded wooden placard, almost entirely obscured by the shadows. But after adjusting the contrast and the exposure using a photo tool, a word became visible: Sea Drift. I searched the name and found it was a storage yard 5 miles up the coast. No website, just a phone number and a half-finished listing on Yelp. I called, no answer, so I drove there myself. It looked abandoned, chain-link fencing, busted lock, and a row of rusting cargo containers behind a sea of dried weeds. But one of them, container 43, had fresh drag marks leading to the door, the kind wheels leave in sand when something heavy's been moved. I walked closer, and I heard it, a click, a shuffle, breath, not mine. Hello? I called. No answer. Then, from the side of the container, a child's voice, soft, flat. You're not him. I turned. A boy stood halfway between the structure, red hoodie, head down, dirty trainers. My pulse cracked. Owen? He looked up. It wasn't Owen, but he looked like him. Same age, same eyes, too thin, sunken cheeks. He stared at me for a moment, then turned and ran. I didn't chase, I froze, because in that moment, I realised something that still sits in my chest like ice. He'd been trained not to run from danger. He'd been trained to run from anyone but him. That night, I filed everything with a new detective, Detective Faye Rourke, a younger officer from a neighbouring county. She actually listened. She took the notebook, the photos, the storage yard lead, said she'll loop in the feds. 2 weeks passed, no call, until 2:17 AM on a Thursday. My phone buzzed, unknown number. Mr. Dawson? The voice said, we think we found something. You need to come to Redwood Junction. Redwood Junction was a burned out logging town 90 minutes inland, nearly deserted. I arrived just after sunrise. Faye met me outside a weather-beaten mobile home, surrounded by state police and unmarked cars. She looked exhausted. He was here, she said quietly. We think, recently. Inside, the trailer was a maze of maps, scribbled notes, and surveillance photos. On the table, circled in red pen, was a name. Owen, quiet, like shells, keeps to himself. Underneath, move again soon, too many eyes at the coast. In the kitchen was his bucket hat. Torn brim, faded blue lining. I picked it up and smelled the salt still soaked into the fibres. Where is he? I asked. Faye just looked at me. We don't know, but we're close. What came next was worse than I imagined, not just because Owen was still missing, but because they believed he wasn't alone. The trailer had references to at least 5 other children, some with initials, some with partial photos, all boys, all listed under aliases with like bait, shadow, new shell. The man they were tracking The one from Google Maps image had gone by multiple names: Marshall Lane, Gideon Clay, Warren Harlow. He wasn't on any national register, no birth certificate, but the photos proved one thing: he'd been collecting children for over a decade. Then came the hardest part. They found a video on a device hidden in the trailer's bathroom vent, timestamped May the 9th, 2021. It was dark, grainy, but clear enough. The camera panned over a small room, mattress, flashlight, canned beans, stacks of sketchbooks. Then, a figure stepped into a frame, red hoodie, eyes wide, tired. He looked at the camera and whispered, "I'm not supposed to talk. He says they'll find me if I do. He says Dad stop looking." He looked straight ahead, and in a voice that shook me to the bones he said, "I still remember the beach." Then the video ended. The morning they found him, I was sitting in my car outside the empty church parking lot where it had all started. The phone rang. It was Faye. "We've got a location and we think it's him." She didn't say Owen's name, not yet. They tracked a vehicle registered to one of the aliases, Warren Harlow, to a shuttered seasonal motel 40 miles north of Crescent Ridge, a place that stayed closed during the off-season but still had water and power. A maintenance worker had reported flickering lights, said he thought squatters had broken in. When police arrived, the power had been cut, but there were recent footprints, one adult, one child. I drove like a madman, ignoring the speed limits, barely blinking. By the time I arrived, the scene was cordoned off with tape. I saw the motel room, room 12, door splintered, light flickering inside. Faye met me at the tape. She looked pale. "He's alive," she said, "but you need to prepare yourself." Inside the room, the air was musty, heavy. There was a single mattress, a cracked window, and a duffel bag of non-perishable food. In the corner, crouched by the heater, was a boy, red hoodie. He didn't look up when I entered. His hands were dirty, fingernails chewed raw. There were tally marks etched into the wallpaper beside him, hundreds of them, one per day, per night. I don't know. I stepped closer. "Owen?" I said. He flinched. Slowly his eyes lifted, and he stared at me. Not with fear, not with recognition, with uncertainty, like he was waiting to be told if I was real. "It's me," I said. "It's Dad." He blinked, then in a voice barely above a whisper, "He said you'll stop." I dropped to my knees. "We never stopped, not for a day." And finally, slowly, he reached for me. Not fast, not cinematic, just cautious, like someone extending their hand towards fire to see if it burns. And when I touched him, he trembled, but he didn't pull away. He was taken to a medical centre under observation, malnourished, mildly dehydrated, no broken bones, no visible signs of abuse, but his psyche was a puzzle with missing pieces. The man, Marshall Lane, or whatever his name really was, had disappeared again. The motel room had been rented under a false identity. No fingerprints matched, but in a drawer, hidden behind duct tape and candy wrappers, was a USB stick. On it were folders, dates, locations, and names. Some were crossed out. Owen's wasn't. We brought him home, but it didn't feel like home anymore. He barely spoke, slept in short bursts, ate little, and whenever I walked down the hall too fast and turned the doorknob too hard, he flinched. He didn't like mirrors, didn't like closed doors, and didn't like the ocean. Therapists said it could take years, that trust couldn't be forced. Eleanor and I took turns sleeping near his room. We never left him alone. We cooked his favourite foods, showed him old photos, played recordings of his voice when he was younger. He didn't respond to much, until one night he brought me a piece of paper. On it was a drawing, a beach, a cove, and a boy digging a hole beside a woman in a hat. "That's Mum," he said quietly. It was the first time he'd spoken a sentence in weeks. I cried for nearly 10 minutes straight. A month later, Google Maps updated Shellman Cove. I didn't expect it. I almost didn't click. But when I did, I found something. A new image. A man standing at the dunes, holding the hand of a small boy. Their backs were to the camera. But I knew it was us. They blurred the faces, of course, but there, by the boy's feet, was a bucket. Familiar, blue. It sat in the sand behind a small, half-finished hole, just like old times. If you're hearing this, it means I survived long enough to tell it, but not everyone does. Some kids never come back, some images never load, and some truths you're not supposed to see. If you made it this far, maybe you're not like the others. Hit subscribe and I'll keep the stories coming.